Okay, so today we're going to talk about sacred values and how it relates to social inequality, at least the perceptions and solutions of social inequality and how they differ between liberals and conservatives. So again, we're doing moral psychology pretty much for the rest of the semester, and at least in these next couple of lectures, we're going to be doing it within the framing of the culture war between liberals and conservatives in the United States. Okay, to start things off, we're going to play a game. Okay, now if we were together in person, we would have a real reward here in which I would be asking you to, with your clickers, play a game, and then one of you would be randomly chosen to receive the reward in person, okay, and in actuality. So, but in any case, this is how the game goes. One player receives an endowment and must offer some amount to the other player, okay, and this one player is, say, an undergraduate at a California university, and he's going to play with you, right, via some video game, some network, and he's going to offer, he's given an endowment of money, say, $1 or so, and he's going to make an offer to you. Now, the other player, which is you, must accept the offer in order for both players to receive the allocation. So, for example, he gets $1. If he offers you 50 cents, you must receive this, you must accept the 50 cents in order for both of you to get paid. So you receive the 50 cents and he gets what's left over. If he were to say give you 10 cents, offer you 10 cents, you'd have to accept the 10 cents. You would get 10 cents and then he would receive the leftover, which would be 90 cents. He could actually offer you 90 cents, and if he offered you 90 cents, you have to accept it, and then you would get 90 cents and he would get 10 cents. Now, if you don't accept it, then neither of you receive anything, right? Neither of you gets paid. Okay, so imagine that the game is going as follows. This person, let's call him Chuck, he's offering you, he receives $1, and he's going to offer you 20 cents. Now the question is now, are you going to accept it or are you going to reject it? And so if you accept it, if you press accept, you will, in fact, actually receive 20 cents. He gets 80 cents. Now, so it's oftentimes the case that people will not accept this, right? Will oftentimes not accept this because 20 cents is seen as an amount that is, in fact, too low. It doesn't seem fair to most people. Now imagine actually that he has $10 now, so he's given an endowment of $10, and he must offer you some amount, and he decides to offer you $2. Are you going to accept or reject it? If you accept it, you get $2, he keeps 8. If you reject it, neither of you gets anything. Okay, so then you would make a choice. Now, as it turns out, most people here, playing the game for reals will often reject this, right? Often reject the $2. It's seen as not enough, not fair enough. Okay. Now, it's actually the case that more people will accept the $2 out of $10 than accept the 20 cents out of $1, right? Because stakes are higher, and you have this notion that it still seems unfair, but so you have a preference for fairness, but at the same time, your preference for fairness can be compromised if you're given enough money, right? So you can imagine if I offered you, if he was given $100 and he offered you 20, we would probably even get more people accepting it, right? Than when he's got $10 and he offers you 2. Okay, so now let's think about this game in terms of its this game theoretic logic. So this is called the ultimatum game, and the game theory predicts, if we were to look at this, let's see, here's some choices for you to choose. If you were to actually just look at this from the pure payoffs that game theory would predict. So this is your partner. This is Chuck. He receives an endowment of $10, and he's going to offer you either $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, $6, $7, $8, or $9. Okay. If you accept it, you get $1. If he offers you $1, you accept. He'll accept it. You get $1. He gets $9. If he offers you $5, you accept. You receive $5. He gets $5. If he gave you $9, for example, you receive $9. He gets $1. If you reject anything, you don't get anything, and he doesn't get anything. Okay. So what's the completely rational thing to do here from a game theoretic perspective? Well, it's in fact actually to accept any offer, because you see, actually, if the goal is to maximize the amount of money that you're receiving, which in this, in the parameters of this game, you're supposed to maximize the number of dollars that you receive. You should always accept any offer, right? Accept anything. It's going to be better than if you reject. Okay, so this is what game theory predicts you should do if you're perfectly rational, right? But this is not what people do. Okay, it's not what people do. People will, in fact, offer usually a 50-50 split. That's the most common offer. It's oftentimes the case that people will go 4 to 6, 350 to 650, right? But right around $3, if it was going to be 3 to 7, right, offering you receive 3 and you get 7, people will start rejecting it, right? And particularly if it's $2 or $1, particularly $1, most people will just reject it. Okay. Now, so what's the interpretation of this? Well, the interpretation of this is that we, in terms of our utility function, we value money, but we also value fairness. And so we may be willing to pay a cost, right, in one to maximize the other. So we're willing to pay a cost in dollars to maximize our utility, our fairness utility curve, right? So we have a money utility curve and a fairness utility curve, and we care about both of them, and we're willing to pay a cost from one to the other. You're willing to pay a cost, right, in your fairness preference. If the money's high enough, right, you could compromise your fairness preferences, but at the same time, you're willing to compromise. So you're willing to actually pay for fairness as well. So which is the following does game theory predict if chips rationally pursued utility and that utility is defined as food? Well, then they should in fact actually take the selfish allocation, right? But again, that's not what they do. They don't always take the selfish allocation. They prefer the pro-social allocation. So again, evidence for the preference for fairness. Again, and recall, fairness is what we mean, at least in this situation, is a kind of equality of outcome, right? That we tend to have, that seems fair to us. Equality of outcome seems to be fair, right? And there's different views of actually fairness, but that's at least one component, and these studies actually are at least tapping into that component of fairness, okay? All right, so there's a different version that's very loosely based on the Ultimate game that Franz de Waal's team did, where he used capuchin monkeys, right? These little small South American monkeys, where they were receiving cucumbers, and then all of a sudden they started receiving, one would receive a grape. So it goes something like cucumbers are offered and accepted without exception. So everybody's eating cucumbers. Both players, they are working on some task, right? And both accept cucumbers without exception. However, when one receives a grape and the other receives a standard cucumber, now it looks like the allocations are unfair, right? That the outcome is unequal, okay? And so what was the outcome in your homework when you did your homework assignment? What was the outcome there? Did the cucumber receiver reject his food? Did the grape receiver felt entitled to the cucumber's rope? The grape receiver bargained for his next option, crackers. The cucumber receiver the cucumber receiver, the cucumber, okay, tried to trade it for a grape. No, the cucumber receiver actually rejected his food. Now what seemed actually completely normal, right? completely fine. When someone actually got something better, now it seemed unfair, and he'd rather throw it away than actually eat it. So in a sense, it's as if they're playing this ultimatum game, and they're turning down the offering, right? They'd rather have nothing, right, than see an unequal outcome between themselves and their partner. So this is another item. Again, we would be using clickers on this if we were together. Which of the following explains the previous finding? The players are inequity averse. B, the players are risk averse. C, the players reject a Pareto efficient outcome. Or D, the players prefer a Pareto efficient outcome. And the answer is, now recall, you're going to have to go to your homework assignment and remember actually what the definition of a Pareto efficient outcome is. And a Pareto efficient outcome is a situation where at least one individual, right, is better off and no one else is worse off. Okay, it's a rational solution to certain outcomes where you can imagine that as long as no one's worse off, we should be accepting of someone else actually getting more, right? But as it turns out, we should be, but we're not always. Okay, sometimes we are. This is a situation actually where these monkeys seem to be rejecting a Pareto efficient outcome, right? So they're both getting cucumbers, and all of a sudden there's a Pareto efficient move. One gets a grape, the other gets a cucumber. No one's worse off. One individual's better off, but now it seems unfair. So what they're in fact actually doing is they're rejecting a Pareto efficient outcome. And you could say that A is also true because the players are inequity averse, that they do not like to see inequality of outcomes, and they're averse to an unequal outcome. Okay, so players are inequity averse and they're rejecting a Pareto efficient outcome. You might say that they reject a Pareto efficient outcome because they are inequity averse. So what explains the seeming lack of rationality and pursuitility in the ultimatum game? People are confused. People are no smarter than non-human primates. People don't just value money, they value fairness. We went to poor public schools, or none of the above. Well, it seems actually that the right one here would be, we don't just value money, we value fairness. Money is good, money is utility, but it's not everything for us, right? We value other things into our utility function. So we value fairness. Okay, so fairness is an important value for people and perhaps other primates, suggesting that this preference for, or this inequity aversion seems to go back pretty far if some of our closer ancestors have it as well. Of course, fairness may mean different things to other people. Again, we were just talking mainly about equality of outcome, which is the kind of fairness that liberals tend to emphasize, right? Equality of outcomes, where conservatives value fairness, but the type of fairness that conservatives value is more along the lines of equality of effort to reward. If you work hard, or if you're smart, or if you're doing something, you're being productive, and you're adding a lot of value to society, then you should get more than others. And so if there's different outcomes between people, then it's viewed as being fair, because that's still a kind of fairness, because some people are putting greater effort or adding more value than others, and that they should be compensated for that. The fact actually that it's unequal is less important. Okay. Now, conservatives also understand this idea of equality of outcome as being not ideal, but they are tolerant, right, more so of inequality of outcomes than liberals tend to be. Okay, so in having our meetings of mind between liberals and conservatives, it's important that different groups work together to solve problems for a common good. Right, so we're going to have to understand that all our values, that there's going to be trade-offs there, and that compromises are necessary if we're going to work together and live together and not escalate this culture war. But this problem seems to be compounded when moral communities, so both when liberals or conservatives, have interests that they view as immaterial, right? is immaterial. So the liberal preference for the equality of output, you can say that's something like an immaterial value, right? It's not complete 100% immaterial, but it's immaterial, right? We call these things that are immaterial as sacred values, right? Sacred values are things like love, family. We don't like to think actually that we could pay for these things, right? You can't pay. You shouldn't pay for sex, right? You can't be paid to belong to a certain religion, right? For example. And sacred values, right? Again, they're believed to be immaterial, and that it seems right. It doesn't seem right to have to attach a dollar value to them. Okay. And these sacred values are above criticism. You're not supposed to call them into question, meaning that they're taboo. And that violations of these values cause moral outrage. Right? We get upset morally. We're morally indignant. Right? We're outraged when they are violated. So here's a set of studies that was done by Phil Tetlock and his research team. I think it was at UC Berkeley, published around year 2000. So in this study, they're actually looking at the level of moral outrage, like how morally outraged are you by these following statements. So these are statements, right, that are designed to go against the beliefs, the religious beliefs of conservatives. Right, conservatives tend to be more religiously conservative than liberals. Liberals tend to be more likely to be secular than conservatives, and so statements like these aren't seen as being all that offensive to secular liberals, but to religious conservatives, they might be, right? So these are counterfactuals, things actually that you're not supposed to entertain, right? That you're not supposed to entertain actually these kinds of ideas if you're, say, a committed conservative Christian, right? And so as expected, conservatives show greater moral outrage towards these kinds of statements than secular liberals. And so what these folks wanted to do was look to see to what extent that you could show that liberals also have sacred values and that they're willing to pay for those sacred values, right? Or at least act in a way to seem actually that they're willing to for dollar values to be not maximized, right? The outcomes for their companies, for example, to be compromised, right? Because they prefer egalitarianism, they prefer equality of outcomes. And so in this study, it's a very, very sensitive and touchy study, to be sure, tested the hypothesis of whether race egalitarianism is a sacred value for liberals. Right? This race egalitarianism is a sacred value for liberals. And the study went along the lines as following. These research subjects were business students at UC Berkeley, and they were pre-chosen for either being far to the left or far to the right. I think it's probably top and bottom quartiles of conservatism and liberalism. And these students were given a business task, so a portfolio of insurance plans. Okay. And they're told, and they understand it also because they're business students, that the goal is to maximize pricing, to maximize profits to the insurance company. Okay, so the idea is that you're going to be making judgments on insurance plans. You're going to be reading various insurance plans, and you're going to judge which one that you're going to recommend that the company adopts. Okay, and the company is going to make the most money if the profits, right? If the so the profits are going to be maximized if you price customers, so the amount of money their premiums, the amount of money they pay per month, to their risk level. So people actually who have a high risk level of actually having to cash into insurance, right, to make a claim, or should actually charge more, right? Just in the same way you think like something like, oh, if somebody has 5 tickets and 2 accidents, that they pay more, right, for car insurance. This is along the same kinds of lines here, okay? So what they're doing is actually that they're evaluating theft insurance business plans for different companies, right? And the idea is here is, should you charge all customers the same? Or should you charge customers by the risk in their neighborhood or the risk in their street, right? So different customers are going to have different kinds of likelihoods of being robbed, right, or being burglarized. And so the question is, given that that's actually the case, should customers actually have to pay more if they have a higher risk level, right? Because of the street that they live on or the neighborhood they live in. And so there's a different set of conditions here. In one condition, this is a control condition, the risk information was given without the applicant's race. So they're given a set of demographic variables, and they're given actually the likelihood of someone in fact actually having to file a claim because they were burglarized. And so this risk information is given, but they don't mention anything about the applicant's race. So the applicant's race is immaterial. It's not relevant in the control condition. And then they have what I'm calling a race taboo condition, where the risk information is given with the applicant's race, right? And so their people are given a risk score, and they're also given information among the demographic information that they're given. They actually put down their race as well. Okay. And so you've got one condition where you get the risk information, no mention of race. One actually where the race taboo condition where the risk information is given, and the race of the applicant who's applying for the insurance is given as well. And so in this setup, which is probably true in real life as well, most of the high risk companies are going to be black, because black people tend to live in areas where there's higher risk of theft, higher risk of crime, and so if they're going to get insurance, they're going to be more likely. The idea is they're going to be more likely to file a claim. Okay, and so we're calling this a race taboo condition because for liberals, right, this is going to cause some degree of conflict, right? Because they care a lot about the outcomes, equal outcomes between blacks. So they would like actually if blacks and whites didn't have to pay a different amount to get insurance, right? But that's going to be compared now to, that's going to be have to be traded off to some degree now to the goal of maximizing profits to the insurance company. And so the dependent variable now here is the level of endorsement to each business plan. So they're given, in this one particular setup, they're given 2 business plans, one where the risk information is given without applicant's race, and the other where the risk information is given with applicant's race. Okay. And so then they're asked on a scale of 1 to 10 or whatever the thing is, how much do you endorse this business plan? And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you endorse this other business plan? Okay. And so this is what the data looks like here. In the control condition, you get not too much of a difference between liberals and conservatives. Conservatives seem to be a little bit better at, saying that you shouldn't, in order to maximize profits, you need to make the premiums reflect the level of risk by the company. That's how you're going to maximize. Now, liberals tend to be a bit more egalitarian, so liberals are going to be more likely just to say, just a little bit, but more likely to say, that we should charge everybody the same, right? Regardless of their risk profile, and a little bit less likely than conservatives to say that let's recommend this risk. Let's recommend one that's tied to the risk levels. And so what you actually see here is conservatives relatively consistent. They're saying, okay, this is the one you charge it where you recommend you charge everybody the same. This is the one where you like the one where you recommend that you do it by risk. And conservatives clearly like the one by risk more than the one where you charge everybody the same. Liberals a little bit so, but not as clearly as stark as conservatives, at least in the control condition, seem to be better at being consistent with the goal of let's maximize profits. Okay. Now look what happens though when you but liberals still understanding that as well, right? They liking the version where you charge by risk more so than charging everybody the same. Liberals understand that too, just not as starkly as conservatives do. Okay. Now look what happens when we when actually the race information, right, is given as well. Again, so the black applicants are going to have to pay more if you charge them by risk because they live in tougher areas, right? And what you see is actually now is that you see liberals really overcompensating here, say, oh, no, we must charge everybody the same, right? We must charge it. They're liking the condition. They're liking the insurance policy where you charge everybody the same regardless of risk, right? Much more than they like the one where you charge everybody by risk, right? Because their risk profiles are tied to race, and they don't want to charge blacks more than they charge whites. Okay, but it's interesting here is that conservatives still have the same pattern as they did in the control group. They still say charge everybody by risk. If blacks pay more, then that's how it is. Charge they like that more than charging everybody the same. Okay, and so this manipulation isn't affecting conservatives at all. Look at the bars here. Look at their liking for the two different types of insurance packages. It's the same as it is here in the control group, right? About the same, right? They're consistent with the notion we got to maximize profits. We like the one where you do it by risk more so than you do it by then charging everybody the same. And for the conservatives, the race of the applicant is immaterial. It doesn't matter. Okay. Where liberals, once you actually say that you mention the race of the applicant, now liberals are saying, no, we got to charge everybody the same, right? We got to charge everybody the same because they don't want to, right? It's taboo, right? In order to take race, to take that into consider, to think actually that they would in fact actually be charging more for black people than so an inequality of outcome, right? Liberals are much more averse than conservatives are on this. Okay, so the implications here: liberals are more egalitarian than conservatives in business plan choices, right? In the control condition, but they seem to be pretty roughly equal and understanding the goal is to maximize profit. However, in the race taboo conditions, the liberals will show extreme overcompensation, right, in their business judgment in order to avoid causing blacks to pay a higher premium. In a sense, they're willing to pay a cost, or they're willing to oppose a cost on their business, on the insurance company. They're willing to pay a cost in order to ensure fairness, at least fairness as conceived by the liberal mind. Okay, so this has been replicated, showing that there's not only race egalitarianism where you get these kinds of things happening, whereas so conservatives actually tend to valorize or sort of think of capitalism, our founding fathers, for example, as being above reproach when you criticize these things, or you call them into question. Conservatives tend to be uncomfortable with that. Liberals tend to care about other different, again, gender inequality, low income, and so when you challenge that, when you challenge the idea actually that maybe the genders aren't equal at everything, and we should just be comfortable with some aspects of inequality, they tend to be offended by that. Okay. So when groups become moral communities, they bind us within groups, but they blind us between groups. Right? We had mentioned this before. We failed actually to see the inconsistencies, right, in our own positions when we're viewing things as a moral community. Okay, political orientation has become moralized. It's become increasingly moralized, right? Where if you're a liberal, you tend to think actually that you're morally good, and the conservatives morally bad, and vice versa. We become prone, and when this happens, we become prone to confirmation bias. We demonize outgroups and their beliefs. We're more likely to commit the moralistic fallacy, dismissing information that doesn't validate our worldview. right? And we adhere to sacred values. Our values actually at some point can sometimes become sacred, so much so that we're not willing to compromise on them. And so we are willing to sometimes act in the interest of our values, right? At some cost to us or some cost to the organizations to which we belong. Okay, so I think we'll end there today. So that should have actually been helped you understand actually the notion of sacredness, right? And that both individuals from both the left and the right in politics tend to have some aspects of sacredness, right? In which they don't want to compromise these kinds of sacred values. And that we're willing to pay for this notion of our beliefs, right? Our sacred values. And it seems to actually that we're willing to pay for it or impose some costs on the organizations to which we belong. And that this preference seems to go back a long time, right? Perhaps back to a common ancestor between us and chimpanzees, right? Maybe even sooner. So these moral intuitions, right, seem to be pretty deep in terms of our psychology. Okay, so I'm going to end there and post Thursday's lecture probably by Friday afternoon as well. I'll ask if you've got any questions on these things. Of course, I'll start out when I'm back on campus. I'll start out our next lectures with of course, question and answers if you have questions about any of these kinds of things. In the meantime, you can send questions to the TAs. I'll start actually be responding to emails later, early next week. Okay, so I think that'll do it for today. Hope you got something out of that, and we will. I'll see you in a couple weeks. On to this now is a game from your homework assignment that was due Tuesday. And it goes along something like the following lines. Franz de Waal's research team conducts a study where chimps play a version of the ultimatum game, so where proposals are made using colored tokens. Tokens symbolized by pro-social, where they get an equal split, or selfish or anti-social, where the proposer receives more than the receiver, or sometimes the proposer gets everything, the receiver gets nothing. Okay. So you got an equal split, and this one is actually if you give them the red ball, that symbolizes equal split. If they give them the blue ball, then that symbolizes the proposer gets more than the receiver. So, and this question is now asking you which was the most common outcome, and the most common outcome was, in fact, the pro-social allocation, as you recall from your homework assignment. Pro-social allocation. The chimps, in fact, actually were more likely, right, to give an equal split in the presence of their friend, right, even though it meant that they were going to get less if they gave an equal split. But they preferred actually to see that the other individual was getting something rather than they got everything and that their friend got nothing. Okay, so there's some evidence now that not only is it humans that have this preference for fairness, and we're even willing to pay for it. So these chimps are in fact actually willing to pay for it. They're going to get less food, less of the treat than they would have if they would have given the selfish token. But they went with the pro-social token, right, most of the time, because they have a preference. They seem to have a preference for fairness, right, as it turns out as well.